Hi everybody, this is Elena. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a registered nurse over in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and I'm going to have a little interview today with my lovely brother, Selva, and I'd like to introduce you to him. Let me just flip the camera real quick. Let's flip it over. Okay, this is my brother, Selva, and Selva has an honorary degree in biology, and he also has a diploma in environmental science, and he was a certified US EPA emissions auditor for coke oven batteries. So the biggest issue that's been on our minds today is the upcoming ferrochrome plant that is being talked about in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, because obviously it's going to affect all of us over in the Sault Michigan side. As you all know, 100% of our water comes from St. Mary's River. And of course, we share the same air that Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario does. And my meteorologist husband frequently tells me that air does push over their emissions quite often. And today we're going to talk about some things that really should be considered in adding additional industry to Sault Ste. Marie, either Sault, honestly. So, Selva, tell me about your activities in regards to, for example, Algoma Steel.
Well, I've been based, so I was an emissions auditor there for a third-party auditor. So our jobs were to go into monitor all the emissions from the coke oven batteries and to reporting on that. So I decided to not do it anymore because I wasn't sure if I agreed with how it was being done and how the ministry had arranged it. So I decided not to work there. And I live in the area, so I always would smell the coke oven battery smells. And a lot of people in Sault Ste. Marie are used to them, so they're not aware that they're there sometimes, because it's like if you go into somebody's house, then you might notice the difference in the smell of their home. It's just similar like that. So they were getting bad at one point, and this was before March. It was in February. So I said, okay, they're getting bad, and it was because they had dark opacity stacks, and they have a lot of that, which is a lot of violations for the Canadian EPA. So I started to monitor them just normally, just driving by, because I live near the area. And on March 9th, they had a big emissions event. So on that event, the ministry acknowledged that it was like significant emissions, and it was what they would categorize as like a catastrophic event for them. So my biggest issue with that was when I gave videos, because I took video and photos, and I gave the videos and the photo to Mr. Fred Post.
And you're doing this legally, correct?
Yes. Everything I do is on public property. In fact, the original locations that I went to, I verified with the city of Sault Ste. Marie that they were owned by the city of Sault Ste. Marie. And the police department did attend a couple times to inquire, and they did say as long as it was on public property, it wasn't doing anything wrong. Every location is on public property. So, and they are aware of it. And so is local ministry. They were sent pictures, and they know where I am. I even sent a map of the 3 locations where I am to the ministry, marking where I am. So if they wanted to know where the photos came from or where I am, it's normally 3 locations. And I always encourage anyone, because I've had at least 50 people come up to me, including Algoma employees, and ask me why I'm doing what I'm doing. I tell them why I'm doing it. I have pictures on my phone. I show people. But currently what I do is I gather the information, because what a lot of people don't realize is this type of industry, like others, is about self-reporting. So the industry has to report an emissions event, because the ministry can't watch all the time. There's not enough resources, that sort of thing. So what they do is they ask them essentially to say, okay, if you have an emissions, you report it. So in the case of Algoma, they have to report it on their website. And it's if you go to their website, in their environmental section, there'll be a thing called a process upset table. So that's where they would report an emissions event. So what I've been doing since March 9th, because the ministry was not interested in doing further investigation, and Algoma has very much downplayed it. So most people have went on Sault today, and the photographs you see on Sault today are when the emissions were like getting a lot better and they're almost over. But it actually started at around 9:45. It was very bad, And I have my first photographs of by the time I grabbed my equipment was 9:55. So in that case, when the emissions are really bad because they're being heavily released, Algoma has the responsibility to call the Spill Action Center. The Spill Action Center basically coordinates with emergency services and stuff to send people out just in case, like fire or ambulance or that sort of thing. So they knew of the problem and the loss of power at 9:32, but didn't call until 10:38. So with my video and photos, you can see how bad the extensive emissions were, and they waited until that period to call. So when they were providing information to the Spill Action Center and the ministry, they weren't divulging how serious it was at the time. So by the time they gave it to the ministry and the ministry decided that they would attend, the emissions event was mostly over. So when you look at Sault today and people talk about the fire, the flames there, those are their flare stacks. Because when they lost power, they had to release all the volatile gases inside their coke oven batteries. And to make it safe so they don't have an explosion, they have flare stacks and it lights the coke oven gas on fire. And that's why you get the huge amount of black smoke. But inevitably, there's some that they can't light up. So their primary responsibility is to make sure they get most of it, which essentially they ended up doing. But you will see in the video that some obviously will escape. So the problem I had when I first worked in ministry is that they never really informed the public. It was a very basic explanation, and it kind of passed through. Like Sault today even said that they would be reinvestigating, and then it was just a simple explanation. So back to the process upset table, they're supposed to report, okay, that event happening. If you were to go today on their website to the process upset table on March 9th, you won't even see anything saying that there was an emission from that day. If you go to they have a community liaison committee. It's called the Algoma Community Liaison Committee. It's made up of members of the city, public members, Algoma Public Health, people from the United States are part of it. So their job is to inform the public. But from my research and what I'm doing, I don't think that they provide that committee with all the information they need to inform the public. So that was one of the main reasons why I decided that I was going to do monitoring of them.
And you're not getting paid to
I don't
monitor.
get paid a cent. Like, I wish somebody paid me. Like people say to me, you know, who's paying you? Nobody. In fact, one of the most common things people say to me is, like, a couple people come up to me and say, finally you're doing something about it. And this one gentleman, I said, well, I don't know what you mean. He's like, aren't you the ministry? I said, no. He said, aren't you Environment Canada? I said, no. He said, what? And I had to explain to him why I do it. And I showed him everything. We talked about it. In fact, he was a retiree from Algoma. So he was happy about me doing it and caring about it. Because there are people at Algoma. What people don't appreciate, too, is that as much as it is a concern for the everyday citizen, you have to think about how much a worker is exposed. So if it's high for you, it's very high for them. So that's why if you ask somebody who works in coke making, the way it works is that they work 1 year and they get 1 year early retirement every year they work.
So there's a reason why they get that early retirement.
Because it's very hot. It's not easy work for them. You're exposed to a lot and they put a lot on the line. So part of what I'm doing, as much as it might seem it's against them, it's for them as well. Because their union needs to know, hey, this is what our people are exposed to. So I decided, okay, because the ministry wasn't cooperating, Algoma didn't want to say much about that March 9th event. Even in their committee meeting notes, you'll see how they mention it says under public complaints. All they mention is a noise complaint from the public.
Any water contamination?
Well, they did. I've asked for freedom of information to see. They had to get the water tested because when they lost power, they also lost power to their pumps that keep their effluent from going into the river. So they made an estimate of how much they think might have went into the river. So the problem being is when they went to go sample, my issue was when they went to go sample the river, it was well after the event happened and when the pumps were restored. So once the pumps are restored and working again and you go test the water, everyone knows St. Mary's River, that contaminated water is long gone.
Okay.
So I'm contesting to the ministry that the information is not going to be as useful as they think. The other thing is they did deposit particulate into the neighborhood. And they took a sample from Bayview area.
Right.
Because that's one of the areas around the plant that gets hit a lot with particulate and a lot of the pollution from the plant. So, I've been doing it now for probably over like 130 days, and I do it.
Wow, that's long. That's a long time.
From about 4.5 hours to 7, and it varies
per day.
Per day.
Oh wow, that's a lot. That's a big time commitment for no pay.
Yeah. So but I needed a large data set, because the thing with these industries is that if you were to report a singular event to them, the ministry would say, well, it would just be what they term an operational upset, kind of a one-off is kind of how they view it. But so I had to prove that Algoma has consistently had these sort of emissions that I'm trying to prove, which they have. And one thing being their iron emissions. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that people should kind of keep in mind. It may not be benzene, but it's still a bad particulate that they shouldn't be releasing.
Okay, which brings me to problems with industry in general, Salva. So that can be an example. Obviously, we're not here just to talk about Algoma Steel. We're using Algoma Steel as an example as to maybe why we shouldn't, at this time, consider adding a ferrochrome plant, because of some common problems with industry in general, which obviously Algoma has. But can you talk about what kind of problems we should be concerned about with an industry in general?
Well, in general, the thing is, every industry, first of all, is going to present you, especially when they're going to do a public consultation, they're going to provide you with all the nice stuff. And they're not going to tell you the things that are realistic. Like, for example, the ferrochrome plant is not going to not produce, let's say, the chromium. Mm-hmm. They're definitely going to produce it, but to a level that the government says is okay.
Okay.
So that's one thing that people have to realize. The second thing about that is that they're going to claim that they have the most high-tech thing. But as everyone knows, eventually these things need repair or they need maintenance. And it takes people because they're machines. So, but the thing is, too, you have to appreciate that the parts are not simple. Like the filters they use are not $50 3M filters you put in a furnace. They're tens of thousands of dollars and the work to do it, and they have to shut down. So what they'll do is they'll decide, hey, as long as nobody says anything, we'll just kind of let it go. And one example is Algoma Steel, in 2009, they put in a bag house, which collects, it's basically like they describe a vacuum that sucks the particulate, the iron emissions out of there.
Sure.
So they spent $25 million on that bag house. They said it was 99% efficient, and they said even if the number 7 blast furnace was at maximum capacity, that bag house would easily collect the iron emissions. But I have tons of video and photographs now in 2019 to show you that it's not doing that. So I've asked the ministry to ask Algoma, is the bag house connected, or is it not functioning? And they should be asked why that is. Because that's one reason why you got to be careful when you think, okay, industries are not infallible, right? And then eventually the technology needs replacing, or they might decide, you know what, it's too much money. That's the most common thing in an industry, because none of this stuff is expensive. So what they'll do is that they'll decide, well, can we have more time to replace it because it's too much money? And the ministry grants it that, and they call that a site-specific standard. So Algoma will say, we have a site-specific standard for benzene, and it's currently much higher than what the government wants the industry to put out. And so does Dofasco. They're not the only one. Dofasco and Hamilton also has one. But what these industries do is they say, we can't spend the money, and we don't have the technology right now to bring it down to that level. So the government phases it down. So that's one reason why when you look at the information from them, you have to find out, okay, how much are they actually putting out? And the ministry will say, well, they meet their standard. But the standard is not itself very good. It's good that they're meeting the standard. But if you look at the standard compared to what it's supposed to be, it's not very good.
So if it's not very good, would we really want to add a ferrochrome plant to all this?
No, and that's the important thing to remember, too, is that like right now, the monitoring system is not, and that's another issue I brought up to the ministry, is not very good in Sault Ste. Marie. Like, in fact, there's nothing on the east side of their facility. So that's one argument I made, including to a public committee member, which they brought up recently at the meeting. Mm-hmm. Now Algoma's saying, well, we're in talks of putting a monitor on the east side, but they're not sure. So basically, any emissions that head to the United States, there's not one monitor that's going to catch that.
Wow. And see, that concerns me because
So-
that's where I live.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, or if you live on if you're walking along the waterfront, or if you're near the canal walking along there, any emissions that head there or go down Cathcart Street. But even though in 2006 there was problems with the air quality in Bayview, which is on the east side of their property, so that's when the ministry put in air quality monitors. They put in 6 what are called continuous monitors, and these devices have little small pipes, like usually like a plastic pipe or something, that suck in the air, and they sample to determine how much particulates in it. And in that case, there's PM10, which is what the government kind of goes with right now. And so in that particular case, when they completed that study, there was a monitor at Bonnie Street, which is on the east side of their plant, and it had the highest exceedances out of all the monitors. But if you were to look at the current monitoring system now, that Bonnie Street continuous monitor is no longer there. There's only, as far as I know, according to them, there's only one continuous monitor, and it's farther northwest from the...
And so why do you think there's only the one continuous monitor?
Yeah, so you have to ask yourself, if the government did a study that said this location has the most exceedances out of any of the monitors, why wouldn't there be a continuous monitor at that location?
At Bonnie Street.
Yeah. So I was explaining this to a gentleman who was asking me at one of my spots, like, this doesn't make any sense. And he says to me, sure it does. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, well, if you don't want to catch them. So, that does have merit, because at the end of the day too, they have, so there's not enough continuous monitors. If you go in Hamilton, I appreciate that it's a different area, but they have one 360 degrees around. And even in the study with Sault Ste. Marie, the further you go away from the plant, obviously the less particulate.
Right.
So why would you want a monitor that's now over 2 kilometers away from the one that had the highest exceedances?
Right.
So that's why if you go onto their website and have an ambient air quality monitoring website, and it will tell you how much particulate is in the air. It's usually low because most of the emissions are heading towards the United States, or a lot of them are easterly. They do have westerly. It's not that they're not. But
right.
They like to argue that a lot of them go west. But I've even shown the ministry through photos and video that a lot of them go east, or southeast, or due east, or northeast. So you have very little monitors there that are going to be able to capture that. But they do have what's called dust fall jars, and they're probably about maybe that big in size and that big around. And they depend on the particulate to fall in from gravity.
Okay.
So, but the problem with them is they don't what's called actively sample. They're not sucking in air. So they depend on the particulate that come and fall in, and then they analyze what's in there. There's a couple, like, the ministry does acknowledge that it's not a robust system to begin with, because you'll get birds that perch on there and they do their business in there.
Never thought about that.
And that sort of thing. And there's road dust, there's all sorts of things. So they have what they call siting criteria. So they try and put it in a place the best that they can. So currently there's 4 dust fall jars that they use, but none of them meet the ministry's siting criteria. So even in their own literature, they say they should meet the siting criteria. So I asked the ministry in Algoma, can you tell me why they don't meet the siting criteria? No, neither one, the ministry in Algoma doesn't want to say the reason for that. So I proposed to the ministry, you have 4 dust fall jars that don't meet your siting criteria, 1 continuous monitor, and somehow they think they know the particulate that's coming out of that facility. And so I proposed to them that maybe they should adjust this. So I did contact the ministry, and April I asked them, okay, what's the situation? I had no response. It wasn't until September, early September, that they emailed me back, essentially saying that they don't have the manpower, and it's money, and it's not high enough on the list. So
Wow.
My argument to them was, well, you can't give a facility like Algoma millions of dollars to increase production, because people don't realize a lot of that money that was given to them is so they can increase production. So with an increase in production, it means more particulate. So if you don't even have a system that's properly monitoring that, so I asked them, well, so how do they essentially do it? So in Sault Ste. Marie, it's mostly mathematically modeled. So it's estimates. So they'll base it on how much steel they produce, and based on this, and then they come up with a number. And
right.
That's what they get. There's not the ministry doesn't walk in with meters and say, okay, collect it, send it to a lab. And they depend on Algoma to give them most of the numbers. Most of it's self-reported. So that's one of the reasons why I do what I do when I watch them, because I have to make sure, are they reporting on their own? So I might be sneaky in the sense that I give them information to see, first of all, are they going to report it? And I look on their list and say, yeah, they did. But then some of them I just say, you know what, I'm not going to let them know. If they're honestly reporting,
right,
I will see it on the list, and you don't. So in my observations, they have less than a 50% reporting rate.
Wow.
For iron emissions, blast furnace, bleeder events. And the problem lies is how the ministry goes about dealing with these companies, like especially like say Norent. So if you're not characterizing what Algoma puts out, because technically you don't really know, because the ministry only audits their coke oven batteries twice a year. And I did that in less than a week. So I would do that in a week, what the ministry would do in a whole year.
Wow.
So they don't know what it's actually like. They depend on the third-party auditors, which I was part of. But for some reason, the ministry never mandated that we were allowed to keep records.
Oh, interesting.
So when we asked, because we wanted to know what we report is Algoma reporting, because we report it to Algoma reports it to the ministry. But Algoma wouldn't let us see it. So we said, well, okay, once a month the ministry meets at Algoma to talk about emissions. So we said, can we attend that meeting just to see what's being reported?
Sure.
And they said no. So our argument was, how do we know what we're putting down? Because the system is on Algoma's tablet.
Oh.
It's not password protected. So I can take if I want to, I can take anyone's name on the list, do an audit, and give it to them. And that's how it would work. So we wanted to assurance, hey, can we know what's going on? So the ministry says, well, because we do extra stuff. And the ministry says that's fine. But our argument was, well, if we do extra stuff, we need to know all the extras are being reported.
Right.
But I said, without us seeing, we don't know. So the ministry says to us, well, they do report everything. But I said to the ministry, but how would you know if, for example, if I did a report, if I didn't verify it, how would you know? Because I could say 7 things, and they could report 5.
So how is that different from Dofasco? For example, if Dofasco was to have an audit versus Algoma Steel?
Well, one of the main things with, say, something like a company like Dofasco, and this has been kind of an issue with the auditors, is that Algoma has exemptions to the auditing process that they don't have.
Oh. So
one of the main things is when they fill their ovens with coal, it's called charging. And the US EPA, because this is what the Canadians use, the US EPA says you have to audit them for 5 consecutive ovens in a row, the performance. And it's based on 12 seconds. Anything greater than 12 seconds emissions is a fail.
Mm-hmm.
But Algoma will ask for extras, which the ministry says sometimes they need it. So our argument is, okay, we go ahead and we do more than 5. But the problem is Algoma has an exemption that instead of doing 5 in a row, they just have to do 5.
So it doesn't matter if you do 30 of them, as long as there's 5 that pass?
So if I did 8, they just have to, they're supposed to report all 8 if I do 8. But because I can't verify, they could just take, say 5 passed, 3 failed. They could just say all 5 passed for the day. And the ministry wouldn't know because they're not going to tell that there was 3 extras taken. So that's one of the reasons why I said to the ministry, it has to be mandated that we keep records, and we're allowed, if we request to see them, that we're allowed to see them. The other thing that's very different, and keep in mind, Dofasco doesn't have that. Dofasco and Stelco, and this is what a US EPA auditor told us. He's a certifier. He told us that, and he even asked in a meeting. He said, "Well, why doesn't Hamilton have it?" And basically, Algoma responds, "We have an agreement," which they do. They do have an agreement to do it that way. But why wouldn't you give the other coke making or steel making companies that same? And that's the way the US EPA does it: 5 consecutive. The rules actually state specifically 5 consecutive. So that's one way. And I kind of proved to the ministry that if we were to do extras and they were to eliminate the fails and only report the 5, how would you ever know? How would I know?
That's right.
You can't verify it. So in a way, somebody could say, well, they might have, but they might not have. I think my point to ministry was, if you're not afraid and you are reporting, then just show it.
Right.
Let me see it. Let me, as an auditor. And I said, it said that puts the companies at risk too, of them choosing to pick what performs the best.
Right.
So, and so that was kind of the one. And the ministry did actually say that they're reviewing the 2 exemptions that I brought up in the
Okay, good.
So because they now are acknowledging that it's not something that they should have had. But my issue still is, goes back to my observations. You know, at the end of the day, if they're not good at self-reporting, you can't trust other elements. And so with these, so you have to consider too, you know, how much is actually in that air. So
right.
First of all, don't have great monitors, and now you're bringing in a ferrochrome facility.
Right.
So if you don't 100% know how much Algoma puts out because you don't have good monitors, the ministry doesn't watch like I do.
Yeah.
At all. And in fact, it's very hard to get them to acknowledge any problems that they have, which they should, but the ministry here doesn't want to acknowledge that sort of thing. How would you know what's going to happen when a ferrochrome comes in? Because you share what's called an air shed. It's basically the air that's characterized around a certain area. So you can imagine that if the ferrochrome plant puts something out, and you don't know 100% what Algoma puts out, how do you know who put out what?
That's right.
The ferrochrome plant or Algoma? And they interact too. So the other thing you have to consider too is, like, you get inversions, temperature inversions, where basically it traps the particulate down. So their stacks will come up and plow with the particulate. It goes up and it sits at a low level instead of dissipating. And that's what some of my pictures are showing with the U.S. photos that I have, that I also submitted to the ministry, showing their stacks going all the way over to the U.S. side. So, and like I said, with no monitor there, theoretically there's no particulate coming from the industry. Because if you have no monitor there, how would you know how much is going there? But they say, well, it's mathematical. They produce this much steel or this and that. And I don't think, like, one thing I think is actually looking at these emissions is something that the ministry should be doing. So you could see, because now they're starting to see from my contact with them that maybe this mathematical modeling and this monitoring system is just not good enough. And that's where the ferrochrome plant will be a big problem, because as far as I'm concerned, they haven't characterized Algoma properly.
No.
So if you bring a ferrochrome plant in, and like I said, how do you know who's putting out what?
And then the reactions, alone would concern me.
And everything is increased, right? Because they're also going to use like coke, and they'll probably get it from Algoma. And, so they're going to share certain emissions they're going to share. So it's going to magnify everything, especially greenhouse gases.
Yeah, talk about the greenhouse gases. What's that going to do for our location?
Well, one of the main things, obviously, is if you're somebody who believes in, okay, you want to stop global warming and you want to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. If you sit a ferrochrome plant in Sault Ste. Marie, it'll be with no question probably one of the top 10 cities of producing greenhouse gases.
Wow. Because
a ferrochrome plant puts out much more greenhouse gas emissions than Algoma steel puts out by comparison. So now you got two, like Algoma steel's pretty big produce already, but the ferrochrome plant is even worse. So you have to consider, like, Mayor Provenzano and the council recently joined basically a group for municipalities in Canada to cut down greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm not sure what his plan is, because I short of putting 1 million, solar panels in and a bunch more like wind powered things, like you're definitely going to be carbon positive. Like, it's going to be huge amounts. So that's one thing that people should consider. Like, you have to ask yourself, like what do you believe in? If you believe that Sault Ste. Marie, as citizens of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, you want to be known for caring about the environment and going against climate change, you can't have a ferrochrome plant for that very reason, because the amount of greenhouse gas emissions are and I think that's why people should ask Mr. Coutts and anyone from Noront how many tons of greenhouse gases they put in, because they may not tell you the number. I would imagine that they would probably just say, as he stated before, significant. Because if you knew the number, then you would be able to say, wow, that's a lot. So one thing people have to keep in mind is that these companies will kind of delay giving you the information until like a process is further along. So in this particular case, that, you know, every week that's wasted in between that process, it's just another step where they're just going to say, well, we're already through the process, so let's kind of go ahead. So everyone has to kind of act as quick as they can, because there'll be commitments made. Like, for example, they already signed a 99-year lease.
Wow.
So you have to ask yourself, if you're now consulting the public, in Sault Ste. Marie it's supposed to be October 23rd with Noront, then why would you sign a 99-year lease? You haven't even consulted the public. Because Noront says, well, if they don't want it, then we won't come here. But you know, those kind of things alone are suggestions, at least to me, that they want the process to keep moving forward.
Right. Because to my knowledge, I don't believe there were any public open forum sessions informing the public when this process started.
And the thing is, like, other cities were much better for that. If you go to Google and you just type in Thunder Bay Ferrochrome, you'll see that they had a public information session. They even invited a couple people from Finland who knew about ferrochrome and a facility down there to talk about it to the public. But to my knowledge, it never happened in Sault Ste. Marie, anything at all like that.
No, I never heard a thing on my side either. So
and that's kind of why I always say to people, you got to be wary of how long things take, and ask those kind of questions. You want numbers, because if you allow them to say, well, we'll get back to you, or when we do the environmental assessment, we'll know, these numbers they would roughly know. And they want to delay giving you specifics, because they want the project to keep moving forward. The further along you get, the further the commitment becomes. And then you'll get someone like, say, Mayor Provenzano saying, hey, we're already 3/4 of the way here, let's go ahead and do it, right? And I know he says he's worried about the health effects, but I personally sent him information and requesting to meet with him about Algoma, and he's not once replied to me in any form.
How long ago did you contact him?
That would have been probably in, I would say, early May.
Really? What is it now? October?
Yeah, I even had to go to the legal office, and I said, well, I want to make sure that he has, because I went to his office, dropped it off, he wasn't there, like, of the emissions from March 9th, pictures, my information to contact me to talk about other emissions, and he wasn't, so I didn't hear from him. So I went to their legal department and said, okay, you take it now. So they acknowledged they had it. And then I finally sent another email. I waited about 9 days for him, and I said, after that, I said, can you at least acknowledge that you have it? And he sent from his iPhone, yes, that he does have it, and that was it.
Really?
So I contacted all the counselors. None of them responded except for Councillor Shoemaker. And Councillor Shoemaker's response, like, his response was more so in defense and basically referring to the wrong event, acting like I was confused. And then a typical politician at the bottom of the email sends me a link to his personal website. I'm not sure how relevant that was, but
okay.
But so the city of Sault Ste. Marie knows, and so they know what Algoma Steel is like. But that's the problem. And I think at the end of the day, with the ferrochrome, is you have to know what you have there first.
Yes. Because
that's the main thing. You have to know, okay, what kind of conditions do we have here? And you have to make sure Algoma reports.
Right.
Like I said earlier, less than 50% report rate. Like, if that's the case, you don't know what's coming out of there, because it's self-reporting. Like, the ministry doesn't. And I even say to the ministry, why don't you produce pictures and videos that I do? Because I know they don't monitor, and that's the way it goes. And I don't want the point is, I'm not trying to the public can't feel that security. Like, I think a lot of people think, hey, the ministry's watching all the time. They even said to me, we have stacks that are cameras that face their stacks, and we can watch them 24 hours a day. So I said, well, if that's the case, well, how come you didn't know about March 9th, all the bad emissions coming out? You said somebody watches it 24 hours a day. If I was watching that, I'd be like, holy geez, what's going on?
Can you show us some pictures of what those...
Well, I don't have...
Okay, yeah, paper pictures of them. I know you have some digital pictures of some of the emissions.
Not from March 9th, but these are some of the iron ones.
These are some of the iron emissions.
So this is the one on that was a huge amount of iron coming from their blast furnace. And on that particular day, I told them it was April 30th.
Right.
Told Algoma. They sent me a picture from Algoma's camera from the 24th saying there was a crane in there. So they were basically saying that photograph is not real. So I basically said to them, well, why don't you send me a picture from the 30th? Because I said it's from the 30th to compare. I did show them how it's a matter of perspective, because their camera shows most of their facility. And you can see in here, I only see a little part of the blast furnace and one of the stacks. So I said to them at the same time, you said they did a spill report, because when they have emissions like this, they have to do a thing called a spill report and give it to the ministry and say, hey, this is what happened. So I said to her, if they did a spill report on that day, then you would know this photo is real. Not only that, I could give you the exact time and they can look at their own cameras.
Right.
And it's all timestamped. So, so these are the iron emissions I'm saying that are supposed to be captured by that $25 million baghouse. And they all have, videos. And most of these that you see, they didn't report. They just let them out and they just go about their business. Like, that was a pretty bad one. Then you can see this one, that's going right to the U.S.
So you've been trained to observe these,
Yeah.
Judging by the colors and what it
Yeah.
looks like. You know what it is, but I think, unfortunately, for most of us who aren't educated on emissions, a lot of us have,
Yeah.
grown up thinking it's totally normal.
Yeah, like even this, if you were to look at this, so that's an iron emission coming out, which should be captured by that that baghouse, which is over here, and the stacks over here.
Okay.
Even this here, this is one of their waste stacks. So this is what you'll see at night. When you see
Yeah.
blue, that's when you see blue, they're burning the natural gas. Pure natural gas burns blue.
Right.
But when it has like anything else in it, sometimes they'll burn off coking gas excess, which they're allowed to do.
Right.
It'll be orange. So if you see an orange color, that's not the natural gas they're burning off. That's probably coking gas or something else that has some other particulate in it that's giving it an orange color. But this is all particulate coming out of there, not lit up. Like,
Right.
they're not allowed to discharge that kind of particulate from that stack without lighting it
Now,
up.
is the other stack normal? Is that a normal
This,
emission? Yeah.
this would be normal. That would be a lot of water vapor, and that's where the
Okay.
greenhouse gases are. So that's normal. And the things you don't want to see is you don't want to see orange
Right.
coming out of there at all.
Okay.
And you don't want to see on the top of their blast furnace, they have what's called bleeders.
Right.
And when you see stuff coming out of there, that's part of what they're supposed to report. Let me see if I can quickly
Okay.
get a picture.
Okay. Yeah, because I often thought, I've seen this before, and I thought, oh, it's normal. It's algoma steel just shooting off some other stuff. Now, what's this? What's going on here? Wow.
That's from Sault today. So if you go on Sault today, and you'd have to type in, because it's pretty far in their list now, like I think they call it black smoke into their search. So this was March 9th. So most people in Sault Ste. Marie saw these photos from Sault today.
Right.
And this would have been after 11 o'clock. So most of the huge emissions were not, this is not even close to what it looked like. There was one, I think, on Sault Online today that they had one. So most of the public thinks, oh, that's pretty much what happened.
Right.
But if you see the actual pictures in the video, there's huge amounts that came out.
Wow.
But yeah, so here's a picture of a bleeder event from their this is their number 7 blast furnace.
Okay.
So see all the emissions coming out of there. Those are on top of there is their bleeder valves.
Okay.
So basically, if the blast furnace has a pressure issue because of something burden moving around or some issue, it will open up, and they say for safety reasons, and it plows the emission out. So they have to report that to the ministry and say the bleeder's open from the number
Right.
7 blast furnace. This particular event wasn't reported. They actually had 4 bleeder events in August, and they only reported 1.
Wow.
So, and you can see right there that, especially because of the gray color, that's not steam. I know people, even the stuff that comes out of the main stack that's white, that's going to have like carbon monoxide and things like that in it as well. But it's a lot of steam as well, but it's not, we're not talking just steam. If they tell you that, then that's
Right.
not. So you can see how it's gray and you got all the black. So, and it will go on. It went on for this like an hour.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a lot going into the air, and it sounds like it happens pretty frequently. Now, are they improving at all?
They definitely improve, but the unfortunate thing about how it works is that people have to complain. So what will happen is somebody, say, submits a suit today,
Yeah.
then they are going to report that because that's basically kind of how they operate. If somebody sees, we're going to report it. So if people don't say anything, then they're going to have the option of not saying anything. And like I said, in my case, it's less than 50% that they report. So part of the whole process is the community has to say something. You have to say something.
Yes.
Like one of the community members I was talking to, he sent them photographs because he looked at their public complaints. Because they also have a thing online that says recent public complaints.
Oh, okay.
And they have very little. Because according to the ministry in Algoma, they have very little public complaints or concerns. But I'm not sure if that's true because of dealing with them if they actually acknowledge people's complaints, number one. And number two, if people don't know what they're looking at or don't know if they should complain or who they should complain to. So what they'll do though too, if you don't complain, is they say to the ministry, hey, can we have an exemption?
Mm-hmm.
Because, we're doing great and nobody's complaining about it. So it's important that the public says, okay, no, we have this kind of event. So I try to teach people like the iron thing. It's pretty simple. If you see a lot of orange plowing out of the iron or out of the blast furnace, then that's a spill.
Mm-hmm.
So you should be able to go online and see it.
Right.
So basically what I've been trying to do, and that's why when people say, okay, are you being sneaky or whatever, it's like, no, what I'm trying to do is test the honesty of the company.
Right. Because it's very important that we have honesty and transparency. That's at the core, I think, of this whole ferrochrome plant.
Yeah, because the ministry, if you give them an event, they will contact Algoma, which will in turn, then they'll say, oh, we did a spill report and we'll report it. So that's kind of the problem I ran into. That's why I stopped giving to the local ministry.
Uh-huh.
Because I knew whatever I give them, they give to Algoma. So I want to see what is the honest rate.
Right.
So that's why I had to do a lot of extra stuff and just kind of selectively say, okay, this is what I'm going to send, this is what I'm going to keep, and then compare. And then that's how I decide, are they doing honest reporting?
Right.
Because the same will be for the ferrochrome. You're not going to get lots of ministry people coming in doing all sorts of great testing and watching. It's going to be, hey, you tell us what you did.
Yeah.
And that's what the public doesn't know.
Well, see, and that's a concern of mine, because if we already have a pretty big problem, as it sounds with Algoma Steel, then why should we add a ferrochrome plant to all of this? Is it going to be, it sounds like it could be mismanaged the same way.
Yeah, you don't know. Like,
you don't.
People can argue, well, you can't judge NORAD. You got to, like the May will say, base it on their own merits. But the problem is that you're also putting a lot of trust that they are going to report and they are going to do this. So you always, in the back of your mind, have to say, well, what if they didn't?
Right.
What would happen? So that's why it's important to know what Algoma puts out, so you know if there's an accident, who did it.
Well, what concerns me too is that obviously this is going to be a partnership. So
yeah.
It's not like Noront is, I'm sure they have their own name, but obviously they're going to be intricately weaving with Algoma Steel.
Because the issue, you have lots of other issues that they don't really talk about. Like they're going to share a dock. So if the dock becomes contaminated, now there has to be an agreement or a way for the ministry to decide, okay, who has ownership of the pollution? Is it Algoma? Is it Noront? Is it joint? Those are the kind of things that matter, because now when you're trying to characterize Noront and Algoma and see who pumps out what, if it's shared, you don't really know. Unless they have a meter or something at where their outlet is. They have a different outlet or something.
So then if they don't know, let's say there's a big, huge spill, if they don't know, then what could happen to our environment?
Yeah, and the problem is too is that, like I said with the technology, if Algoma's baghouse was working great, I wouldn't be filming any iron emissions at all.
Right. So what's wrong with the baghouse?
Yeah, and to this day, until they get the freedom of information, I don't know. But the spill report is supposed to say. But I still don't have it. The ministry's taken. Because
they won't answer your question about whether or not it's connected?
No, not at all.
No. So
they won't answer anything at all, and you ask them the simplest question, and you won't get an answer.
Yeah, and that's concerning too as a resident, and this industry is located right downtown. It's not like it's on the outskirts.
Yeah, and that's the other thing people don't appreciate, is that you're not trying to stop, say, like Noront, period, but it's not the right location for them. And people have to realize too, because people will use the argument, but if you send it to China and all this kind of, but at the end of the day, Noront could go to Timmins if they wanted to, and Canada would still get the money, and it's just not too. But the problem is, Sault Ste. Marie, it's a downtown.
Yeah, that's right.
All these other places, it's like on outskirts. It's like Sudbury. It's on their outskirts. All their facilities, so it's not downtown. That's why when I went to school there, you didn't smell anything, period, in Sudbury. But they have tall stacks, they've done lots of stuff, so that's one of the things. So at least they don't pump out something really, but in the case of Noront, it's like with Algoma, it's right downtown.
Right.
So you have to remember that if there is an accident, and there's always a probability of one happening, you've got a lot of population, you've got a compromised river system, you share with another country.
That's right.
Like, you have to have a backup, because look what happened on March 9th.
Mm-hmm.
Not only was it huge, The ministry decided, hey, we don't want to look further into it. And I've looked even deeper into it and provided more information to them, so that I think they're now looking back into that event. But that's what's concerning to me, is that if you think about how much work that I have had to do, how much that I've had to submit.
And you're educated.
Yeah. If you're an average citizen and say, hey, they're doing this, would the ministry do something? And that's kind of my argument to the ministry. Because they've, like Dofasco, for example, they get a hard time because there's at least 2 councillors in Hamilton that give them, that are big on the environment. They have a group called Environment Hamilton that they do a lot of monitoring. They take pictures, they teach people on what to look for. So Dofasco always kind of gets caught, so to speak, with their emissions. So they look worse than Algoma, but Algoma has similar types of emissions. It's just nobody's watching them.
So to wrap up our little session today, Salva, what would be your recommendation at this moment in time to everybody? Like, what can people do?
I think obviously the most important thing is get as many people as you can to sign up, and especially for people in the U.S., you have to talk to your counselors, your mayor, and get them involved because you guys share the air, you share the water, so it's going to matter it matters even though it's a Canadian issue. The other thing is just to keep ask specific questions, and because if they don't answer, say something like how much in tons of greenhouse gases you're going to put out, then you should question anything else they give you information, because that should be a number they know. They should have an estimate, and it may not be accurate, but it'll be close. But if the problem is that they will give generic answers and say, because one thing they will promote is the jobs, and nobody can deny the jobs, but at the end of the day is you can't take those emissions away. So if they plow something out, they put something in the water, it's just going to get worse. So you have to ask yourself too, is it worth the jobs?
Right.
At the end of the day, okay, Norrent needs a smelter put in, but not in Sault Ste. Marie. So the main thing too is to stay kind of committed to contacting whoever you can.
Okay.
Going to all the, even the one in Sault Ste. Marie on October 23rd.
Okay. October 23rd, everybody. Where's that at? Where's that
right now, they haven't put a time or a place, which people in the city are not very happy about. I want to know about it.
Okay.
But so keep an eye out on that and go to that. And like I said, ask important questions. And just also keep in mind too that even for assessments, because they will tell you that, if the assessments are great, the assessments don't have to be perfect for the ministry to accept it. If they're reasonable, they will just say, well, we'll mitigate the other issues and go ahead with the project. And if they have problems, they're given site-specific standards to give time to fix it and that sort of thing. So you have to wonder how much is happening during that time that they have a site-specific standard. And the same thing with Algoma. You've got to be fair to them to give them time, but at the same time, think of how much more pollution's coming out.
Right, like how much time, when's the cap? How many extensions can you ask for?
Like, for example, Algoma's 7 battery stack, they've been fixing that battery. It's one of their oldest it's their oldest battery. Mm-hmm. It's from the 50s. And Dofasco had one of similar age, which they had to close because of its performance. And Algoma's had problems with it, and they've been retrofitting it, saying they're spending all this money on it, and they're going to try and reduce the stack capacities. But I proved to the ministry that based on their own information, because the stacks have monitors in them that the ministry knows how much they're putting out, and it's only increased. So my argument to the ministry is if they're doing all these important fixes and they're spending all this money, you would expect that the stack capacities would be better.
Yes.
They've been doing it since 2015. And they acknowledged in 2019 that they might have had to shut the battery down because of all the problems it's having, and it's too old. They weren't sure if they could spend the money and retrofit it to make it worth it. So I think now the problem the company has is that they've spent a lot of money invested into it, that they're trying to extend its service life, and it's beyond it. Mm-hmm. So.
All right, well, thanks a lot for talking with us today,
No
Salva.
problem.
Really appreciate it. We appreciate the extra education and background because obviously it's not my area of expertise. So thanks again. And if anybody has any questions for Salva, please feel free to email him at all lowercase selvarasaya@hotmail.com. That's lowercase SELVARASAIAH @hotmail.com.